I am Chairman of the South Korea Exchanges and Cooperation Support Association. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Unification for organizing this great forum. And also I'd like to thank all the participants who are joining us online as well as on-site. In our organization, we take part in the 3 sessions in KGFP for 2021. And this session will focus on how to resume and stabilize South-North Korea economic cooperation. Our original intention in organizing this session was that we have to talk about inter-Korean economic cooperation, economic community on the Korean Peninsula. That's how we started this session. And especially, we thought that we have to deal with the issues of the North Korean sanctions against North Korea, which virtually stopped and suspended all kinds of exchanges and cooperations for over 10 years. And in this session, while we are having a lot of conflicting views, we hope that we could diagnose the current situation, as well as talk about the future direction for the Korean Peninsula and what we need to do. So we want to find a breakthrough and way forward. We have 2 presenters and 3 discussants. So let me introduce them. So the first presenter is the Vice President Yang Moon-soo of the University of North Korean Studies, and Choi Jang-ho, Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for International Academic Policy, will give us the second presentation. And then Yuk Jae-hee, the advisor of the Halla Group, will serve us as a panelist. And Andrei Rankov, professor of Kookmin University, will also give us the comments. And he will speak in Korean because he's very fluent. And also from Hyundai Research Institute, we have manager Yang Hae-jung of the Center for Unification and Economics. So I would like to give 20 minutes to each presenter and 10 minutes to each discussant. And after that, we are going to have another round of the Q&A session. And I will make sure that I will conclude the session before 5 o'clock. And for those the participants who are joining us online, I understand that there is a link that you can click at the bottom of your screen, and it will guide you to the page where you can type in your questions. And I hope that all the presenters and the discussants please keep your time limits. And in this sense, without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker for his presentation, Vice President Yang Moon-soo. He is currently serving as the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of North Korean Studies, and for more than 20 years he has been involved in various researches in this field. Thank you very much. Today I'm going to be presenting on the conditions and prospects for the resumption of inter-Korean economic cooperation. So my presentation consists of 3 parts. So I'll first talk about some preconditions for the resumption of inter-Korean economic cooperation. And then I'm going to talk about the future prospect for inter-Korean economic cooperation. And then I will deal with the issues of sanctions and South Korean government's policy toward North Korea. Let's begin with some gloomy picture. Back in 2018, we thought that the spring of the Korean Peninsula will arrive, but unfortunately, that spring was so short-lived. The leaders of South and North Korea, they came up with a joint declaration, and they tried to embark on a lot of efforts to dramatically improve the inter-Korean relations. However, the U.S. opposed the movement, especially under sanctions, and also after the failure in the Hanoi summit, things have been aggravated. So there are several preconditions, of course, for the resumption of the exchanges, and number 1 is the lifting of sanctions. So sanction has been a serious stumbling block behind the inter-Korean cooperation, and this sanction issue can be resolved through the summit and the negotiation between the U.S. and North Korea. However, I think the chances are very slim that we can find a breakthrough out of the negotiation. So the sanctions, yes, this is a serious stumbling block, but there are also some other stumbling blocks aside from sanctions. For example, like the passive attitude of the South Korean government, and also North Korea's lack of response, as well as the COVID-19. Again, these are all variables that suppress the exchanges and cooperation. But if we just purely look at what was agreed back in 2018, you can see that North Korea is deeply disappointed because the South Korean government did not fulfill its part of the promise. And therefore, I think the South Korean government will and commitment in the future will continue to become an important variable. And as for the small trade and the tourism, the South Korean government tried to pursue some exchanges with North Korea from a small trade and small project. But I believe that if those kind of attempts were made earlier, right after the Hanoi failure, then I think things might have been much better than today. And here you can see the prospect for the North Korea and the U.S. negotiation. So the Biden administration on April 30th said that it completed its review on North Korean policy, and there are both factors for optimism as well as the pessimism. So what's optimistic is that I think Biden administration will pursue policies that are different from the previous administration, such as grand bargain or strategic patience. I think Biden administration's approach will be different. And in this sense, I think we can hold some optimism. But what's unfortunate is that there is still no incentives that can induce North Korea to the bargaining table. Especially the North Korea, they continuously demand the U.S.'s withdrawal from the North Korea hostile policies, but the U.S. so far has showed no response. And basically, the U.S.'s position is that the ball is in North Korea's court, meaning that the U.S. will not take any kind of action first before North Korea. And also, the Biden administration does not have any kind of specific strategies against North Korea. Only principles and goals are presented so far. And so what we can see is that the Biden administration only devised the principles and goals for North Korean policies with no specific strategies and tactics. And this actually shows that the North Korean nuclear issue still remain low on agenda in Biden administration. And I think that the Biden administration will get closer and closer to what Obama administration pursued, which is the strategic patience. So that's why I think pessimism is actually growing, and people believe that the Biden will just stick to the methods of the previous administration under Obama. And here you can see the North Korea's response. And the North Korea said that and emphasized that there's no expectation toward United States, but continues to demand the withdrawal of the U.S.'s hostile policy. And they also claim that they will have the principle of power, goodwill for goodwill, and leaving the possibility, but still leave the possibility of negotiation. And also North Korea made it very clear that it's not going to hold excessive expectation toward North Korea, and they will not repeat the same mistake as they did with the Trump. So I think that there is a sort of the invisible fighting going on between the two countries. And recently, with regards to the joint military exercise between Korea and the United States, North Korea threatened South Korea that if that exercise takes place, then North Korea will exercise a lot of provocative action. However, when that exercise actually started, North Korea didn't really do anything. They just showed some low-profile provocation. And with the passage of time, let's say that if North Korea believes that there is no possibility for the U.S. to change its policies that North Korea may rely on as traditional tactics, which is a brinkmanship. And North Korea may exercise some shock therapy in order to create some breakthrough in the situation. Anyway, and as for the changes in the perceptions between the U.S. and North Korea when it comes to nuclear issue, here you can see that their priorities are different and their policy stances are very different. But both countries actually call the other parties to move first. In other words, the U.S. Hope that the North Korea will show the signs of changes and also show some visible progresses in terms of the denuclearization, whereas the North Korea said that the U.S. should move first and take action first. And North Korea keeps saying that the door of the dialogue is still open. So this actually shows a very deep distrust that are rooted in both countries. And I think that both countries believe that time is on their side. In other words, the U.S. believes that because North Korea is under sanction, time is on its side. And also with the COVID-19, North Korea is having a lot of sufferings, and therefore with the passage of time, the sanctions will become more and more effective and North Korea will eventually give in. That's what the U.S. expected toward North Korea, whereas in North Korea, they believe that again time is on their side because North Korea's nuclear and missile capacity will grow over time and the U.S. will not be able to bear North Korea's nuclear threat. And also what's important is that for the U.S., the North Korea nuclear issue is not a policy priority, whereas for the U.S., for North Korea, the U.S. is the most important negotiating partner. But still, the North Korea enjoys the patronage by China. But with the COVID-19, China can no longer be a reliable supporter. So yesterday, North Korea mentioned that it's going to yield its vaccines to the international community, and it actually shows North Korea's distrust toward the Chinese vaccine. And as with the 2018 experience, yes, there is always a possibility that dialogue can be resumed all of a sudden. And that's why the South Korean government made the prediction that the North Korea may come to the negotiating table with the U.S. to terminate the hostile relations with the U.S. Next. Currently, South Korea is under the progressive government, but next March we have a presidential election, so things can be changed pretty dramatically. And we have mixed views on North Korean issues, especially with the sanction. Progressive believe that we have to pursue the economic cooperation with North Korea, whereas the conservative oppose this idea. And conservative says that we really have to focus on alliance with the U.S. and quick distance with the international community, whereas the progressive claims that, of course, Korea-U.S. alliance is important, but we also have to put the same emphasis onto the inter-Korean relations. And the conservative believes that if the sanctions are lifted or eased, then this will only protract and delay the resolution of the North Korea's nuclear issues, whereas the progressive believes that the sanctions have to be eased first in order to induce North Korea to make efforts for denuclearization. So here you can see that we have a lot of conflicting mixed views between the conservative and the progressive. And also, there are several projects that are not subject to sanctions, and also projects with the complete removal of sanctions. So we can categorize the inter-Korean cooperation projects into several categories. So there are several projects where the sanctions are already removed, including the virtual meeting of separate families, modernization of tree nurseries, joint excavation of the to retrieve the remains of the soldiers who died during the Korean War, And there is also another category of the inter-Korean economic cooperation projects, which is currently under sanctions, and the sanctions that need to be lifted in the future, including the Kaesong Industrial Complex project. And also we have the project ambiguous, whether to be subject to sanctions or not. And that includes the Tamiflu delivery to North Korea. But because of time constraint, I'm not going to elaborate on each of them. But anyway, the sanctions are the important preconditions to resume the economic cooperation between South and North Korea. But at the same time, I think that North and South Korea will have a lot of issues to be dealt with before we see the full swing resumption of economic cooperation. So for example, like a lot of principles have come down, and also there's an issue of outstanding payment. And as for the Kumgangsan project, I think it's more complicated than the Kaesong Industrial Complex project. So as for the sanctions itself, I think that the Kumgang Mountain project does have the greater difficulty, because North Korea tried to pursue the tourism project on its own, and they changed the law, and there are a lot of interests at stake. So things are more complicated with the Kumgangsan tourism project. And South Korean government also pursued its own tourism project to North Korea. So as I said, things are more complex. And not just the Kumgangsan, but also Wonsan and other. North Korea has embarked on the tourism development project. And as for Wonsan, what's interesting is that Ms. Lee will later talk about the North Korean tourism project, but what's unique about the Wonsan, Won Mountain, is that different from the Kumgang Mountain tourism project. Rather, the previous project, North Korea relied on the capital and the finance from South Korea or other countries. But as for the Wonsan project, North Korea spent its own money building infrastructures and promoting tourism. But because of the COVID-19 and the sanctions, somehow the tourism project discontinued and suspended. But anyway, there are a lot of things that need to be resolved aside from sanctions in order to see the full swing development of the tourism project in North Korea. And here we can see the railway and road connection and modernization. Again, I think that there is some room for maneuver, although we are under the sanctions, because there are some clauses that exemption clauses, but still, as a lot of interests are at stake, we only had the kickoff ceremony, and we haven't really made any kind of progresses in reconnecting South and North Korea via railway and roads. And as for the modernization project of this transportation infrastructure, there's almost no progress. And also there's an issue of the passage of the North Korean vessel into the Jeju Strait. And again, it's subject to the violation of the May 24th measure. And so I think this is something that should be resolved aside from the sanction issues. So in conclusion, yes, sanctions cause a lot of difficulties for North Korea, and we have to wait until the sanctions are lifted. However, we shouldn't just passively wait and wait. And also attaining the exemptions from sanction is not easy, but this is something that we must do. North Korea also claims that for the essential part, the sanctions have to be exempt. So we have to take a gradual step to reopen the economic cooperation with North Korea. And for this, I think that the Korean government commitment as well as the consensus in the society is so critical. And so just taking one by one the phased approach, I think that's the only solution currently available in this stalemate situation. If you look at the history of the inter-Korean relationship, even if there were a lot of difficulties, if we do not give up on and if we continue our efforts, then things have been improved anyway. So I think we have to learn the lesson from our history. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for saving your time a little bit. So he has been giving us the presentation regarding the relations of inter-Korean and also the prospect for the future. He started with the gloomy idea, and we have a lot to do. So what is important as a factor is the intervention by the government. And also, it will be the third year of the September 9th agreement, and also the new ideas will include ideas of having the resumption of the 3 businesses with North Lake Kaesong Industrial Complex reopening and restarting of the tourism in the Kumgang Mountain, and also the importance of the other institutions. And also, we do not see the clear way forward in the future, but we have to start with small ideas in order to reach the big step. And that is the essence of his presentation today. Now, thank you very much. Now, we'd like to have Professor Choi Chang-ho, Research Fellow of Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. Mr. Choi will be talking about the ways for sustainable inter-Korean economic cooperation. He has been an ardent expert on the economic cooperation between North and South Korea. 20 minutes will be given to you. Thank you very much. My name is Choi Chang-ho from Korea Institute of International Economic Policy. My topic today is ways for sustainable inter-Korean economic cooperation. Let me start. This is my table of content. As you see here, I'm going to start with the environmental changes in economic cooperation and the responses by Moon Jae-in administration. The history of economic cooperation between our 2 Koreas has been 28 years, starting from 1988 with the Olympic Games as a starting point. The Olympic Games was held with a view to having it an event for peace. That's when we started to have the inter-Korean exchanges. And then until 2016, we had these programs when it was abruptly stopped by having the closing of the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Since 2016, we do not have any reopening of the activities between our 2 countries. In the past, we had our history of not stopping the cooperation even with some political turmoils or the events as seen from the 1990 issues and 1993 the first nuclear crisis and also the Geneva Agreement. That didn't lead to the stoppage of the activities in economic terms since then. However, 2016 was an exception because we actually stopped any operation in the Kaesong Industrial Complex. The excuse was that with people residing in the North Korea, we cannot continue our activities because we cannot guarantee the safety of the personnel working and living in Kaesong Industrial Complex. And also it's because no responsibility or accountability has been borne by the North Korea. That's how and why we stopped operation in Kaesong Industrial Complex. In the meantime, we also experienced a lot of changes in the environment of the economic cooperation. With Park Geun-hye administration as a starting point, we saw the improvement of the weaponry system of the North Korea, especially the missile systems, to threaten even the United States. So the inter-Korean relations became a subject of international attention. We also had other political turmoils between our 2 countries in the past. It was a long time ago, so we didn't have any repercussions across the world. So we were able to continue our economic cooperation even with such incident. However, time has changed when we are not able to continue our cooperation if there is an event that is known to all the colleagues in the whole world. Also, we saw the stoppage of the connection of industries between the two Koreas, and also we had continuous reduction of the personnel with experiences of the economic cooperation. It has been 11 years of stopping the exchanges and cooperation, and also the Kaesong Industrial Complex has been at standing still for the last 5 years. We are now losing the dependency of the economy for both countries. Also, the people are losing the momentum for supporting the unification, who are under the 40s. And we have new momentum that we need in order to have the economic cooperation. This time, the type should be the totally different one. We also see the changes of the public opinion. We had a survey done by Seoul National University in 2018. Would you please look at the tables here, which are very small and fine. I'm sorry that it is not visible to you. And when you see that there is an increasing trend of the public opinion that North Korea is a subject for the cooperation with the improvement of relations since 2018. However, after 2019, negative opinion dominated on the North Korea. So if you see these graphs here, it is less than 20% that they are optimistic about the North Korea. However, the things have been changed once again with the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. There was also a public support for the cooperation with the North immediately after the Winter Olympics. So this time around, if there is a new round for the economic cooperation, there should be the public support by the people. This is interlinked with the argument and controversy about excessive assistance to North Korea. If you look at this graph once again, you see that the peaceful coexistence is favored by the people by more than 50%, and unification is favored less than 30% of the people. Moon Jae-in administration has the policy on the Korean Peninsula, which is fit for the changed environment. It has two tracks here, the peaceful coexistence and the co-prosperity. For the peaceful coexistence, they are going to make the environment for the peace building in the Korean Peninsula, and also it will contribute to the peaceful coexistence in the northern region. The Moon Jae-in administration has been almost 5 years now. There are more people who are opposing this than those who are approving this. So for the co-prosperity, we have the new plan for the new growth engine acquisition for the reciprocal cooperation, and also institutionalization is planned as well. Let's now look at the Korea peace economics of the Moon Jae-in administration. He says that peace is the economy. After 2018, when we had the summit meeting, there was also a need for the inter-Korean reconciliation and peace and cooperation 2.0. My next item is about the economic cooperation between the two Koreas in a sustainable manner. I made my own definition of the sustainable economic cooperation between the two Koreas. First of all, this inter-Korean economic cooperation should be made regardless of the situations of the politics, diplomacy, and the military. Secondly, it has to be making contribution to the integration, growth, and stability of both countries' economies. Thirdly, it should also have a system where both parties are doing their utmost as responsible member of the international community. So let me reiterate. First of all, they should have the separation of the politics and economy. Secondly, they should be based on the economy. And also thirdly, they have to be having the joint responses for the international community. I have made 4 directions for the future sustainable economic cooperation between the two. First of all, we have to have improvement of mutual understanding through the exchanges expanded in the personnel and also culture. Secondly, under sanctions, we have to have a low level of economic cooperation and humanitarian assistance in the beginning to form the mutual trust. Thirdly, we should have the advancement of the cooperation in industries by having the institutionalization. And fourthly, we can grow into a member of the international community. Also, we have sustainable cooperation in 4 levels and 11 projects. They are actually the summary of what has happening so far. Nothing new here. So I just had a summary of the projects that everybody knows. Now, thirdly, I'm going to talk about the humanitarian aid and the vaccine cooperation. Professor Yang also said that the vaccine is really important. I say that the COVID-19 is a very important crossroad here. You know that the vaccine and COVID-19 situation and pandemic are more serious than anybody expected. Especially in the North Korea, they had the long-term blockade so far, and also they did not have the problems with the crisis in the beginning, but now they are beginning to have the awareness on the economy. So they are awakened to the healthcare crisis of the world. And also by blockading their borders, they thought that in the beginning, economy can be restored by keeping themselves locked in. However, more problems arose when Delta variant started to be emerged. Delta variant is not caring for the borders. Even the North Korea was not an exception. With the very severe stricken economy, the COVID-19 was salt on the wound. Therefore, we also have to know that the bigger number of the people who are injected with the vaccines could lead to the restoration of the economy, and they can have the system, they can live with COVID-19. However, in order to move into the goal of the with COVID system, they have to have the infrastructure on the medical care. However, unfortunately, medical care infrastructure is not abundant in North Korea, so that with COVID is not possible at all at the North Korean system. So without resisting COVID-19, no cooperation between the 2 Koreas, I think. So far, luckily, in the South Korea, we do have about almost 200 million portions and doses of the COVID are available in South Korea. Also, next year, we're going to have the vaccines that are produced locally in Korea, made in Korea. So probably starting from 2022, it will be possible for us to have some kind of cooperation in terms of the vaccine supply with the North. When I was making this presentation, Delta variant was not a big problem. So especially before the Beijing Winter Olympics, I thought that everybody can join the Winter Olympics in Beijing. But now, today, when I am presenting these materials, I'm not quite sure if we are able to attend physically into the Winter Olympics in Beijing. So we should have the momentum to draw the inter-Korean economic cooperation. Also, we need support for the North Korea in order to have this system. And what is needed here especially is the cooperation with the international organizations. August this year, we started to have a big improvement in the environment. The North Korea was making suggestions to China to resume the cargo trains. And the responses from China was that not only cargo trains, but also the aviation can be started. China suggested to North Korea to open all the systems, but they did not have the full agreement between the two before they broke up with the negotiation. The trust level is that low between the two countries, and also the vaccine problem and the virus problem was also included in their agenda. So the COVID-19 is a precondition for us to start to talk with the North Korea. The next thing I would like to emphasize here today is the definition of the small trade. Actually, small trade is not an academic term that is in consensus, but I have my own definition here. So it is based on the trading of the livelihood goods that is not in violation of the UN Security Council sanctions. And also, it is necessary for us to have the partial waiver or exemption of the sanctions by the UN and the United States. So, centering around the livelihood goods, it might be possible for us to release these sanctions. However, no matter what small idea this is, we need to have the support internationally, especially from the US and the UN. So any opening of the small trade would require those agreements from other parties as well. So for us, if we want to really have the small trade, regardless of COVID, that is with the viability. As Dr. Yang mentioned before, the passage of the vessels by North Korea across the Jeju Strait, that is also a part of the ideas that we're thinking about. And also, we have the payment of the system, probably barter system can be made as well. So in the contribution in physical can be also made. Now, I'd like to talk about the Kaesong Industrial Complex. This is a must for us in order to have our restoration of the cooperation. I don't know about the perspective of the foreigners, but from the perspective of North Korea, Kaesong Industrial Complex is the only example for a third party to be in and be successful. There have been many special zones of the industries in North Korea. All of them have failed. Only Kaesong Industrial Complex has been successful with the participation by the South Korea. Kumgangsan tourism project is also another example. And also, if we are starting to see the reduction of the sanctions in the future, the trade should be immediately started between our two Koreas. Prior to 2018, we did have the big projects as a candidate for the excavation of the minerals in the mines of the North Korea. North Korea is abundant with the zinc, and they also had the exchange programs of zinc to South Korea. The condition was that they're going to have the barter system. The sustainable economic cooperation between the two Koreas likewise should be based on the condition that we are just opening the negotiation and dialogue first. We also have the idea of institutionalization of the inter-Korean relations. We should have the revision of the North and South Korea agreement. So we have the Close Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA. The definition and purpose is like this, based on the condition that the North and South Korea are in the special relationship toward unification in order to construct cooperative relationship which is reciprocal and also the mutual for the co-prosperity. We can strengthen the cooperation in various aspects on the goods trades, labor, capital, and services. And also, we should have other detailed agreements for every sector. Now, this is also revision 2 of the agreement between the two Koreas. Whenever there is a condition that is fit for North Korea might be welcoming this. Now, I'd like to talk about the internationalization of the inter-Korean economic cooperation. When we started to have the Kaesong Industrial Complex, we started to talk about the participation by a third-party company, which means companies coming from other countries than Korea. The foreign companies have the importance because it also means that internationalization is being made on the Kaesong Industrial Complex. After companies in the Kaesong Industrial Complex have been profitable and lucrative, other countries are trying to enter Kaesong Industrial Complex since 2006. Examples are Dashing Diva, SW Sangar, and Korea Pretom. Also, the internationalization is needed for the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and the government wanted to have the site prepared for the industrial complex prior to the Kaesong Industrial Complex, because government should do something to lower the risk of the projects. Governmental guarantee was also needed in the form of an insurance so that the uncertainty by the private companies can be reduced. So that's what we call platform of the economic cooperation. And the biggest and the best example was Kaesong Industrial Complex. In order for the project to be floating, there is a need for making it a platform for the time being. And also we have to induce foreign players to come in as well. Next, I'd like to talk about the activation of inducing foreign companies to enter the inter-Korean economic cooperation. It is actually difficult for foreigners to go directly into North Korea without bypassing or trespassing other countries. For example, they always go through China to get to North Korea. And also they can make an entity formed in South Korea before entering into North Korean market. And the foreign investment laws in other countries are more flexible. Therefore, we need to induce foreign companies to come into the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Also, we should have other means, for example, using the international financial institutions. When there is a need for the capital injection, we need to have participants coming from the financial sectors to give the pipeline of the capital. In the medium and long-term perspective, we need to participate. We need to ask them to be participating in the IMF, World Bank, IBRD, and the list goes on. Also, in order to have the membership into international institutions, it will take more than 10 years, 10 to 15 years. Even if we start negotiation today, it will be only 10 or 15 years later when they are accessed to those international institutions. This is my conclusion. So we have to have a policy for the Korean Peninsula that is sustainable, and it should be suitable for the changing environment. Also, we need to have the need for the sustainability and the economic cooperation. As I have explained so far, we should have the continuous promotion phase by phase. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choi. So, in order to ensure the sustainable inter-Korean economic cooperation, you talked about a lot of preconditions in detail. Thank you very much for your informative presentation. The South Korean government, especially with the inauguration of the Unification Minister Lee In-young, we are trying to find out various measures that we still can do under sanctions. So small deals are one of the way. And the Minister Lee In-young suggested the trade of the North Korean liquor. However, even after 1 year, we haven't really imported one bottle of the North Korean beer yet, and no progress has been made. I have been working in this institution for about 2 years, and when I first joined, I actually promised that I am going to bring the North Korea dried polak, and also I will bring the guest to the dandong and serve the best cold noodle dish with the dried polak in dandong. That was my promise, but still I haven't been able to fulfill the promise. Now we would like to hear from Yuk Jae-hee, advisor of the Halla Group. He's the living witness of the Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation project. He was the one who advised the former chairman Chung Ju-young, and he contributed a lot to the success of the tourism project, also various economic cooperation projects. And in this sense, I think he's really a living testimony. And now we would like to hear from Mr. Yuk.
10 minutes will be given to you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yuk Jae-hee. Thank you very much for the presentations by Professor Yang Mun-soo and Mr. Choi Jang-ho. It has been tremendously conducive to my understanding about the diagnosis for the future prospect of the relationship between the two Koreas as well as the relationship with the U.S. As you all know very well, what is regrettable here is that we are repeating the same ideas for the last 10 years over and over again. Anyway, if I may give you my comment about the presentations of both gentlemen, we do not have the changes in the environmental situations, and also we do have the existence of the sanctions by the UN Security Council. What is needed now and here is that realistically we need to have the waiver or exemption for the sanctions by the Sanction Committee of UN Security Council. Of course, we do have the physical problems of the things like, as you said, Kaesong Industrial Complex and Kumgangsan tourism projects, but they will be solved as time goes by. And also, I believe that in order for the inter-Korean cooperation to be in full scale, what is needed, as you know well, as evidenced by President Moon Jae-in 3 years ago when he met with Kim Jong-un, there was a joint communique announced at that time. I still vividly remember that before the 100,000 citizens of Pyongyang, President Moon Jae-in was making a speech. So that was very moving. At that time, what was promised at that time was the projects for the railroad and also industrial complex resumption and so on, depending on the circumstances of the international community, without having the assurity by the all members of the international community. I don't see any promises. I don't see any promising future for them to be cleared up. So in order for two gentlemen's ideas can be realized, we need to have the exemption or waiver of the sanctions on the North Korea. In order for us to have the waiver for the sanctions on the North Korea, I don't know what measures or efforts have been made by the Korean government, South Korean government yet. I just overheard from the media that they are meeting with somebody, but meeting itself is not solving all the problems. I don't know what exactly they were talking about, what exactly they were really making efforts. I have not heard from anyone about their detailed activities to close out the sanctions here. And Russia was different from us because Russia was able to have the exemption for the sanctions on Nazin-Hassan Railroad project between North Korea and Russia. We didn't do that. We couldn't do that. Also, in the systems, they have their excuses to go forward in order to have the projects. And that does not require money to be spent. I see some clue of the possibilities, but I don't see any of the activities actually done by the government yet. As a person who used to be an entrepreneur and a business person, I really ask the government to start pan-government efforts to do this from now on. Probably the government can make a special task force in order to gather all the expertise from every sphere of the industry so that they can deal with the UN and the US to lift the sanctions. I really urge the government to do that. Secondly, when there is no guarantee for the promising future, these two gentlemen suggested that there can be a possibility for small trade and low level of cooperation as a starting point. I would like to make a comment about this. As for me, starting from 1998, I have been to Pyongyang more than 100 times for the next 20 years. I've been meeting with my counterparts in the North Korea to discuss many matters. After that, I was not able to go into North Korea, therefore I met them in a third country. I continued my discussions with the people from North Korea in other countries. What I feel now, looking back what has happened, the small trade or low level of cooperation are not promising because there is no likelihood for North Korea to accept it. In order for North Korea to be initiating cooperation with the South, they are resisting a lot of risks. Therefore, it is natural for them to ask for more compensation, more benefits. I don't see there is any reason for North Korea to accept small trade or low level of cooperation because this is disproportionate against their risks. It has been more than 10 years since they have this strategic patience. They're just closing out their doors, having this brinkmanship strategies. Is there any reason for North Korea to open it right now only for small trade or low level of cooperation? Also, I know that the crisis in North Korea is really severe. They have a lot of types of crisis, like food crisis and the livelihood goods prices and so on. But what is the most dire in North Korea is the shortage of dollar. They need dollar, but if we offer barter of goods, they will not be happy about it. They will not come to the table of negotiation at all for this only. If we have to tell other colleagues in South Korea as business people, I don't think that there is a possibility for these Korean businessmen to be in agreement with ours. Maybe yes, but the likelihood is very low. Therefore, at this point of time, in order to open the door and also in order to go for the co-prosperity as a end goal that we wish, and also new economy grown and the continuous economic cooperation, what starting point should we make? My suggestion is as follows. I don't know what you think about this. Of course, this is dependent on the COVID-19 ending. It should have the ending of the COVID-19 first. We should encourage the people of interest should meet and go to the North Korea more often. The government should allow them to go to North Korea. Visiting North Korea is not subject to the sanction by UN at all, so the government can always allow people to visit North Korea for business negotiations. There's no reason not to say yes. Especially those people who are interested in the business with North Korea should be encouraged to take part in. Looking back, what happened in 1998 with Kim Dae-jung administration, Sunshine Policy was announced as a proactive policy. That was not possible to draw North Koreans to the negotiation table. However, when Chairman Chung Ju-young went to visit North Korea with cattle, they started to come back to the negotiation table, and tremendous things happened afterwards until when they have the Inter-Korean Summit meeting in 1997. Therefore, I believe that economic cooperation will be enough to entice North Korea to come to us. Visiting will be the starting point. Therefore, many business people should be able to visit North Korea by the approval of the government. We need another Chung Ju-young. We need another conglomerate who is very brave to have the starting point of the business with North Korea. That's my wish. When economic cooperation is resumed in the future between the two Koreas, large corporations are highly important in their participation. Without the participation by the large corporations, North Korea will not be budged at all. So we will not be able to achieve the prosperity without the participation by large corporations. But there is reason for these large corporations not be interested in these North Korean issues. In 2008, when there was a hint, large corporations, and it was in 2018, large corporations, including the large banks, were interested in North Korea and they visited North Korea. However, there was a dissuasion by the U.S., especially by the Secretary of State and also the Secretary of the Finance. They had the conference calls, emails, a lot of alarms, and also the warnings against large corporations. That's why the large corporations froze. And there's reason for that. What they are worried about is the secondary boycott. If they are not careful enough, their main business will be in danger. That's what the large corporations feel. Therefore, I encourage the government of today to be very subtle in giving them approval to visit North Korea, because visiting North Korea is not a subject of the sanctions at all. So that kind of atmosphere should be provided by the government at the auspices of the government. This is something that private sectors cannot do. So this is something that I really want to encourage the government to do. Thank you very much. That was based on his experience on the ground. Especially, he expressed this idea that the small trade is not something that is enough to entice North Korea to the negotiation table. So the secondary boycott, as he mentioned, is something that is making the sanction very solid. So how we can overcome the secondary sanction issue by the U.S., that's another problem that we have to tackle with. I would like to ask Professor Choi Jang-ho once again to deal with this issue. Now it's the turn for Professor Andrei Lankov from Kookmin University. As you know very well, he has been living in Pyongyang as a student for long. His main topic is the life in North Korea, and also he was one of the 100 international scholars designated by foreign policy. So he has been able to look at North Korea from another perspective. 10 minutes, please.
왜냐하면 외국 사람이
Thank you very
발음
much.
때문에 마스크
My
착용할
strange
때만
accent.
아주
I will take off the mask for better communications.
여기에서 제일 먼저 여기에서
First of all,
조금 나오게 되어서 영광이라고 생각합니다.
it is indeed a great honor for me to be part of this panel, together with the Professor Yang Moon-soo and Professor Choi Chang-ho. In fact, I read their papers like 20 years ago. And however, this time, I think that I have to raise some criticism
제가 개인적으로
because
남북 경제 협력
I personally believe that the inter-Korean economic cooperation, yes, this is very ideal, very good. And my hope, my wish is that in early 2000, when the Sunshine Policy was announced, I think that we have to return to those kind of situation, and we have to see the resumption of the Sunshine Policy. But the problem is there is no chance for that. As mentioned by Professor Choi, there are several preconditions, rather two preconditions for the resumption of the economic cooperation between the two Koreas. Number one is COVID-19, and second, resolution of the North Korea's nuclear issues. And I completely agree with this. But the problem is that the biggest stumbling block right now is COVID-19 at this point of time. As you mentioned, back in January 2020, North Korea has imposed the unprecedented, the strongest biosecurity measure in order to prevent the spread of the COVID-19. And because of that, I think until the late next year, or maybe summer next year at the earliest, I don't think North Korea will accept any kind of exchange. But COVID-19, yes, this is a very big stumbling block at this point of time, but in the long term, COVID-19 is not really an issue because it's going to disappear anyway. It's going to be subsided. So we have even greater stumbling block, which is the North Korea's nuclear issues. As mentioned by Professor Yang and Professor Choi, you see that the North Korea's sanctions, and if sanctions are not lifted, then there is no chance for our dream to come true, whether it's the industrial complex or a tourism project. But at this point of time, you see that chances are very slim that the U.S. will cooperate to ease sanctions. Why? Number one, North Korea's attitude. North Korea has to show and demonstrate its commitment to denuclearization. However, North Korea does have a strong aspiration and commitment to maintain nuclear weapons. And I think that the decision was already made back in 1980s and 1990s. North Korea is a nuclear power state. This is very unfortunate, but it's unchangeable fact, undeniable fact. Why? North Korea's elite class, yes, they want economic growth. However, for them, their priority is nuclear weapon because it determines their own survivor. They know economic growth is good. However, if they renounce the nuclear weapons, then they will be doomed. Then the economic growth is nothing for them. That's why they have no intention to accept any kind of proposal, any kind of agreements that require denuclearization. And let's think about the Libya. And let's think about Iraq, Ukraine. I think we can learn a lot from their cases. So North Korea, again, has no intention to give up on nuclear weapons. And right now, the U.S. believes that the sanctions is the only viable option where they can exercise influence over North Korea. And also, the U.S. actually has nothing to lose with the sanctions. And so in the sense, I think the North Korea's nuclear sanction, it's like a popular product of the U.S. that a lot of American voters will support. And therefore, if North Korea does not give up, then the U.S. will not budge at all. Of course, we have to have a long-term view. So let's think about 2030, 2040. I don't think that the chances for compromise is very slim. And North Korea will either freeze the nuclear program, can accept the reduction of the nuclear program on its own terms, but it's not going to happen soon in the foreseeable future. So they will continue to try to maintain the nuclear weapons program, although they may reduce some of them, the stockpiles. So in the long term, there is a possibility. However, right now, there is virtually no chance at all for North Korea to reduce or give up its nuclear program. However, South Korea and the U.S. have no reason to hurry up. For the U.S. side, you see that the North Korea remains very silent now, and therefore the Biden administration focuses more on Taliban than the North Korean nuclear issues. And Biden administration already knows that they cannot smoothly resolve the North Korea's nuclear issues, and therefore, and also they have a lot of issues to deal with, including domestic issues, Afghanistan, and so on. And therefore, there is no reason, no incentive for the U.S. to make the compromise with North Korea, which will not be supported by the American voters. And also, North Korea is suffering a lot because of the sanctions. However, still they have China behind their back. And China will continue to support. And from China's perspective, North Korea is a very valuable diplomatic asset, especially given the situation that it's engaged in a fierce rivalry against the United States. And if you go to the North Korea's private market, you can see a lot of products and agricultural products from China. And this strongly shows that North Korea enjoys a strong backing from China. And therefore, in fact, although it's not the massive amount of aid, but still North Korea anyway receives the aid from China without any preconditions to fulfill. In other words, North Korea is sort of done welfare welfare subsidy provided by China. And therefore, North Korea doesn't really welcome the aid and help from South Korea nowadays. And another thing that I would like to talk about is about small deals or small trade. And again, I believe the chances are very slim. Small trade has a lot of risk, including the COVID-19 and also the ideological issues. You see, the North Korean regime is scared of the wild popularity over the Korea's pop culture. And I sometimes read the North Korean newspaper. And I believe that there are a lot of articles that criticize the Western culture and so-called the ideological contamination. See that they strongly denounce these foreign influences affecting the minds of the North Korean people. And therefore, for them, like offering 50 tons of sugars or liquors, it's nothing. So small trade will have very little chance to succeed. And things have changed because of COVID-19 and because of the competition between the US and China. New era has opened. And it's not really the desirable time. And we shouldn't deny the reality that we are facing. Thank you very much. So I sincerely hope that soon we can resume the economic cooperation with North Korea, and so that we can drink the Daedonggang beer from North Korea in Han River and visit North Korea and China as well. And as you know, the professor, he completely agreed with the need for economic cooperation, but he also gave us a very pessimistic prediction that the chances for the resuming inter-Korean economic cooperation right now is very slim, almost non-existent. Thank you very much for your comment. Lastly, I would like to invite the Lee Hae-jung from the Hyundai Research Institute, and she's going to talk about the North Korea's tourism and healthcare and so on. Good afternoon. I am Lee Hae-jung from the Hyundai Academic Research Institute. So I really enjoyed the presentations and also the discussant comments. However, I continue to feel I'm so frustrated. I think that everybody may share my feelings. You see, when it comes to economic cooperation, there are too many restrictions. COVID-19, sanctions, these are all restricting the movement of the trade. And also, although we offer a lot of ideas and projects, but North Korea does not really give us any kind of response. But still, we are here to talk about the potential of the economic cooperation and how to restart the economic cooperation with North Korea. And in the sense, let's say if the inter-Korean economic cooperation resumes, then I believe that it should be better than before. And in order to achieve that, there are several preconditions. And I believe that we have to start based on the existing agreements that were signed between the two Koreas. As you know, this year marks the 30-year anniversary since the signing of the agreed framework. And also from the agreed framework to the September 19th joint agreement, we have to abide by the principles that are stipulated in this agreement. That's the way to preserve peace on the Korean Peninsula. So although the situation is very frustrating, I believe that we really have to find a way forward toward a brighter future on the Korean Peninsula. So sanctions and COVID-19, many panelists talked about this. So I would like to touch up why North Korea shows no response. In order to understand this issue, you have to understand what North Korea really wants, what North Korea is really lack of. In early this year, they came up with the 5-year economic development plan. And we could see that North Korea has a lot of economic difficulties, but still the North Korea embarked on the project to build 50,000 units of the housing in Pyongyang City, and also they talked about the economic project that they pursue. So even under severe sanctions and even under serious economic difficulties, North Korea's focus is still on economy and development. And another thing that North Korea wants to have is that, as you can see from the recent Vienna report submitted by North Korea to UN with regards to the achievement of the SDG and the progress. So North Korea recently came up with the VNR, actually for the first time in its history. In 2017, North Korea mentioned that it's going to submit the VNR within 2020, but because of the COVID-19, things have been delayed. So people had the suspicions whether North Korea can publish the VNR, submit the VNR within the due time. And North Korea actually made it. And this actually shows what North Korea wants. And North Korea accepted the carbon reduction goal and target, and they submitted the VNR. So this actually shows that North Korea is actually trying to show its sincerity to reflect the international values and norms. And it actually shows its strive to become a normal state. And if you read a Vienna report by North Korea, Dr. Choi talked about the accession into the international organizations. And I think North Korea is aware of shortcomings in statistics. And also in its 5-year development plan, it emphasized the importance of tourism industry, and it actually showed its frustration but not being able to unleash its full potential for tourism. And it also highlighted the significance of the Gangwon province as the hub for tourism, and all these are also reflected in VNR. And South Korean government emphasized the carbon neutrality as well as the renewable energy development and green infrastructure. And North Korea actually showed intense interest in these matters in the VNR. So I think we have to delve into the interest that North Korea shows through its report. Then we'll be able to find out some attractive offers that North Korea may respond. And we can have some understanding about that. So under sanctions, still we can engage in cooperation to cultivate human resources. For example, like we can start the exchanges for the talent development in tourism industry with North Korea. This is something that's still viable, that's still open. And in order to resume the economic cooperation, yes, we have to tackle the COVID issues, and that's already covered extensively by the previous speakers. So I will skip that. But still, I think there is a room for cooperation on biosecurity and the responses to COVID-19. And this is something that we have to work on right now. And also carbon neutrality, in line with the carbon neutrality policies that South Korean governments proclaim. You see that we have to expand the scope of the cooperation project with North Korea. So beyond economy to environment and other cultural aspects. So I think we can continue to explore the way to strengthen cooperation with North Korea in these environmental sectors. And also, I think back in 2018, the heads of the two Koreas already agreed on the need of academic cooperation. And therefore, the Kaesong Industrial Complex and the Kumgangsan Tourism Project must be resumed. And together with the global values, we have to find out a way to restart these projects. And already the previous speaker talked a lot about the Kumgang Tourism or the Kaesong Industrial Complex project. So I will touch upon the Kumgang Tourism project. Kumgangsan was designated as a site for the UNESCO biosphere protection. And so the Suncheon and the Kumgangsan area, both of them were designated by the UN. And at the time, the UNESCO said that because South and North Korea, both of the countries were designated for its biosphere convention, so UNESCO made a proposal to the both Koreas that the two Koreas can engage in some cooperation project for the ecological preservation. So I think this is one area that we can explore. So North Korea's VNR shows that the North Korea has high interest in the Gangwon area as well as the Kumgang Mountain. So I think this is something that we can start cooperation. And as for the individual tourism, we had the individual tourism session last year at this forum. And at the time, I talked about the voluntary tourism, which is the combination of tourism with the voluntary service. And I think that the similar concept can be applicable to the ecology sector. So for example, like we can devise the idea of combining the voluntary service together with the ecological preservation. And by doing so, I think we can reopen the tourism project. So in order to resume the economic cooperation, yes, there are several projects that we can think about, and I made the acronym RENEW. So this is actually a summary of my presentation. We have to understand what North Korea wants. Only then we'll be able to come up with the proposals that can induce North Korea's response. So we have to have deep understanding in these matters, and based on that, we have to pursue the co-prosperity. Economic cooperation between the two Koreas should not be a one-sided, lopsided deal. It should not benefit only one party. No, it has to create the mutually beneficial effects for both Koreas, and therefore, based on the reciprocity principle, we have to review our direction for economic cooperation. And under the sanction system, without the support and cooperation from the international community, it's very difficult to build a momentum to pursue and push ahead with these economic cooperation projects, no matter how brilliant idea we have. So I think that Dr. Choi talked about the internationalization of the Kaesong Industrial Complex project. And the international community should be aware that the benefits of the inter-Korean cooperation project can be shared by many countries around the world. And in that sense, they have to render strong support and cooperation. And also, we have to build some national consensus. The problem especially is that nowadays, the young people, they become very indifferent to unification, and their interest has shifted to peace from unification. And I think that more and more young people have negative perceptions toward the North Korea. But still, the survey shows that the majority of the South Korean people want to see the resumption of the Kaesong Industrial Complex. And in order to further expand such understanding, and also in order to build national consensus, we have to think about what kind of measures we can utilize. And as for the institutionalization, Dr. Choi talked about the SEPA. So we have a lot of frameworks and agreements in place already. So centering around this existing agreement, we have to build an appropriate institution in order to continue the economic cooperation, and in order to ensure that the economic cooperation projects are not suspended because of some political instability. So again, this is something that we can work on. And last but not least, the advisor Yuk talked about the need to foster the private sectors and private players, and I completely agree with that. Unless the private players take actions, then no matter how much the government talks about the cooperation project, budget allocation, and so on, things will not move forward, and we will have no momentum. And therefore, the participation by the private actors, private sector is so critical. And in this sense, I would like to propose this renew idea. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. We have 10 minutes to go. We have received 3 questions of the same nature. The 2 presenters might be able to answer some of the comments and questions by the discussants as well. Dr. Yang or Dr. Choi, either of you can answer those questions by discussants. We also have received the questions from the online audience. What kind of types and forms of the economic cooperation there be possible, and also what is the likelihood for us to have the renewal of the systems for the new cooperation. Having said that, we do have the problems existing in the North and South Korea. Is it really viable to have any further collaboration? For the last 20 years, only talks but no actions. So we have seen those things happening in Korea. So is it really possible for us to guarantee, in actuality, the survival of the companies? And is it really safe to have the documentation? Can we trust what is written in the documentation? Another question is, what is the driving force to move North Korea? That is a very tough question to answer right now. So, Dr. Lankov, now you have a question to answer. So we have a lot of issues like the COVAX. The COVAX is like in a very small amount, hundreds of thousands. So it should be like bigger size, like more than 1 million. In order to have the achievement of the collective immunity, there should be very big bulk of the import of the vaccines to North Korea by the international community. What do you think about that? So I give you 3 minutes to go.
For the vaccine issue, in fact, I really wanted to talk about that, but because of the time constraint, I was not able to touch upon this. So thank you very much giving me this chance. So I don't know whether it's in the category of the small trade, but I think that there are several viable items that we can still trade with North Korea, and that's COVID-19. Currently, North Korea is under great difficulty. North Korea claims that there is no confirmed case. Yes, it can be true, but it's pretty suspicious. But the problem is North Korea has almost no access to vaccines. And therefore, South Korea, if it provides the vaccines to North Korea, then it's very likely that North Korea will accept that. It's very predictable. So I think that this is one viable way for cooperation right at this point of time. So maybe directly from North Korea, but I think the chances are higher with the indirect supply of vaccines through the international organization. Yes, North Korea's first priority right now is the biosecurity. So maybe we can find a breakthrough by supporting this matter.
3 minutes will be given to you as well for the general summary. Thank you very much for the 3 discussants. I've been awakened to the ideas that have not occurred to me yet. So I have missed out some of the ideas. Thank you very much for reminding me of these things. Everybody understands that the circumstances are not easy. We have tough situation. Therefore, we need to have the collaboration of our efforts to move forward. I know that we have heard some gloomy ideas, especially from Dr. Lankov. It is true that the situation has been aggravated. It does mean that, however, we should just sit idle. We should do something, whatever. especially from the perspective of the South Korea. If such situation is continued in the future, the biggest victim will be South Korea. It is undeniable. Rather than North Korea, South Korea will be in a dire situation in the future. That is why we are trying to solve this problem. If it is a human history, we also have our principle. Whether the nuclear state is recognized by North Korea or North Korea acknowledges having nuclear, so on. From the perspective, this is something that can happen for the better turn. That's my wish and thinking. And also, the VNR has mentioned by Dr. Lee Hae-jung. And recently, when we talked about the global issues or the global challenges, North Korean issue is not an exception, and also the COVID-19 is also a part of it. Climate change is also taking up the important part of this global agenda. That is why we believe that there must be some international assistance. So in relation to the climate change, as for those responses, we have to expand our approaches to deal with it. And also this is separate from the agreement in 2018. And then after 2018, much time has passed. We also have to reflect what changes have been made so far for the next round of discussions. The same goes for the small trade. Small trade might be refused by North Korea now, but it can be linked with other issues like climate change. So the small steps can be amassed together so that we can make a big lump to become an engine to drive the North Korea up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So you talked about the small trade, small deal, and I agree with this. Yes, North Korea may refuse that because the trade with South Korea involves huge risk on North Korea's side. And therefore, if there is no sufficient reward, then North Korea will not respond to that small offer, where North Korea has very little to gain. And small trade, right now, in this current situation, I think that this is just an expression of the government to continue with the cooperation with North Korea, at least in a small way. But I think that if the COVID-19 subsides and the denuclearization issue is solved, then I think, yes, we have a lot of possibilities to pursue small trade. And China, it imposed the anti-Korean restriction. They try to use this politics to solve the economic issues. So the separation of politics and economy must be guaranteed in writing. However, there is no such thing as guaranteeing forever. So this involves the commitment of the government, and I think this is something that we can pursue. And also the nuclear explosion test and the North Korean spy issue. Despite all these accidents, the economic cooperation with North Korea didn't really decline. And yes, currently we are in a serious stalemate, but I don't think this situation will continue. So both academia, a lot of scholars said that the U.S. is in the second phase of strategic patience, as well as North Korea. So with the protection of the COVID-19, even if North Korea refused to take the vaccines, I believe that the current situation will not continue, cannot be continued. And therefore, now is the time for us to prepare for a new type of economic cooperation. And I think March next year, we will have a new leadership, and I hope that they can launch a new plan to pursue cooperation on the Korean Peninsula, and this will open a new possibility for all of us. So I hope that when this possibility comes to us, we should be ready to and prepared to take that. The North Korean spy incident, the armed spy, actually it happened a long time ago, right? So a few days later, we are going to celebrate the anniversary of the agreed framework. And the core of the agreed framework is the co-prosperity for the two Korea through economic cooperation. So here you see that economic cooperation is the key pillar of the agreed framework. And we still have optimistic view, but still people do have doubts and suspicions whether we can see the resumption of the economic cooperation in the foreseeable future. But I believe the optimism can be achieved with our commitment. Pessimism is the matter of emotion. And therefore, we should not be mired in the pessimistic emotion. Rather, we have to find a breakthrough using our willpower. But we have to take a more radical and drastic actions. Just like what Einstein said, it's a miracle to expect something happen when you repeat the same thing over and over again. And I think the same goes for the US and China and also the North Korea. We cannot expect something different when we just repeat the past practices. And therefore, we have to exercise a strong willpower and come up with some innovative measures. Then I believe in the not too distant future, we'll be able to drink the Daedonggang beer from North Korea in Han River of South Korea. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And with that, we would like to conclude this session.